Hi, I'm Ellie Wong. Welcome back to the Daily Brew, the podcast for the Stanford Daily. Inspired by the New York Times Modern Love column and podcast, Lines of Love is looking for all of your stories about love at Stanford. Tell us about your freshman dorm community, the pets you're reunited with in quarantine, or even that chocolate chip cookie at late night that you're missing right now. Whatever love means to you, we want to hear it. Today, staffers Kirsten Mettler and Zhou will be reading Richard Coca's essay, Transforming Our Definition of Platonic Love. Afterwards, hear from the author about his thoughts on transactional friendships and the fly community at Stanford.
I often think of the last time I was at Stanford. All of my last memories on campus, surrounded by friends. After receiving the email in March to vacate campus, I remember sitting on the floor quietly, looking around, and almost taking it all in. After we all left campus, we knew things were going to change, but I don't think we understood the extent to which this pandemic was going to affect our friendships. I think many of us anticipated that this togetherness was more in a community sense, not so deeply rooted in the physical. I think many of us found ourselves trying to reconnect after we got settled, and found somewhat of a solution to our new living situations. My friends were all scattered across the country, and others in the world. How our friendship dynamics were altered from this point depended on so many factors, not even necessarily the strength of the friendship or proximity to one another as one might expect. Rather, I've become more conscious of how important physical space is in not only building community, but in acting as a conduit for an emotional space where individuals could simply coexist, challenge one another, and in that sense grow together. When people mention the word love to me, my mind immediately goes to this one bell hooks quote from All About Love, New Visions.
Genuine love is rarely an emotional space where needs are instantly gratified. To know love, we have to invest time and commitment. Dreaming that love will save us, solve all our problems, or provide a steady state of bliss or security only keeps us stuck in wishful fantasy, undermining the real power of the love, which is to transform us. Many people want love to function like a drug, giving them an immediate and sustained high. They want to do nothing, just passively receive the good feeling.
COVID has revealed to me that the types of interpersonal relationships we have do matter. Some of the more casual relationships I had, for example, with people that I would bump into on a day-to-day basis, have become some of the relationships I've missed the most. In retrospect, I did not think that a simple exchange of a smile or hug actually impacted me in such a way that it stabilized my mood, gave me a sense of belonging, and ultimately affirmed who I was as an individual. I'm almost more worried about reestablishing these relationships in a post-COVID world, if that world even exists, than some of my more serious, mature relationships. This is because I know the more serious relationships will likely be as strong once we reconnect in person. But I think that feeling of bumping into a stranger, saying hello and exchanging small talk, was something I didn't know I really needed for sustenance. Chance will play a large role in whether these smaller relationships will survive or fade away. COVID has reaffirmed me of the importance of physical space, especially for communities. One of the places I miss the most is the fly office. Going there after class, knowing that no matter what time of the day, or even night, I knew there was always at least someone in there who I could chat with. There's something so powerful about seeing someone's facial expression or body language, and knowing that they're being genuine in their thoughts, their feelings with you. This cannot be replicated over Zoom. There are no side glances in class anymore when the professor or classmate says some nonsense. There's no chuckling at an inside joke. There's no bringing comfort food to friends after a hard exam. It's just something that you can't do over a virtual platform. A lot of the love languages that we usually think about, like physical touch, acts of service, receiving gifts, just cannot be felt the same over a screen. I think one of the main challenges, in this light, is being honest and truthful about what's working, both in terms of how you are communicating, but also where you stand with that person. I personally would be much more comfortable with having someone tell me that I am more of a B-side character to them, and then factoring that into how frequently we, quote, catch up, then wondering where we stand and why they have slowly faded from my life. Quarantine has forced me to ask difficult questions about my own relationships. Where do I stand with this person? Where do I see myself going with them? In an odd way, this pandemic is exacerbating the already existing dynamics and accelerating the timeline in a manner that might be both beneficial and detrimental to my relationships. I have found that in certain friendships, we've gotten incredibly close to one another, to the point where we are describing our bowel movements to one another. On the other hand, there have been some relationships that even prior to COVID-19, I think deep down I knew weren't really going to go anywhere, and social distancing provided a convenient excuse for no longer getting dinner together. And then there have been the sort of relationships in between, where I know they matter to me, but we haven't necessarily been as frequently in contact with one another as we were prior to the pandemic. I think my hope after all of this is over is that we'll be able to reconnect, and I'm pretty confident in that. I personally have never really viewed relationships as transactional. I know that there are some individuals who believe, if you are not one to reach out to me, that I am not going to reach out to you. I personally don't feel that way. I feel like that's pretty petty and a sign of a rather immature or early stage in a relationship. Even if we were to no longer be friends, I personally tend to be the type of person who regardless looks back and appreciates the time and energy we both spent growing our relationship and talking with one another. This line of thought brings me yet again to another quote from bell hooks on the intersection of will and love.
We do not have to love. We choose to love. When we understand love as the will to nurture our own and another's spiritual growth, it becomes clear that we cannot claim to love if we are hurtful and abusive. Love and abuse cannot coexist.
I think implied in that quote is very much that we are all given the choice to either initiate, continue, or end a platonic, really any type of, relationship with someone. Even when those friendships end, and even when they're still there, I'm personally a big fan of stopping and smelling the roses. Those memories, those experiences, the time and love you've both poured into one another is something to be celebrated. I personally cherish every postcard, every letter, every email, every text that my friends send me. Those words of affirmation are a reflection of a choice we both mutually made. Even going back to that quick glance between the eyes, or a smile at a stranger, we're all agreeing to some extent to nurture someone else's growth when we enter a platonic friendship. And the best part about this agreement is that it transcends the transactional. When you make that investment in someone else, that belief in befriending them, in getting to know them, in encouraging them and getting to see them grow spiritually, that investment comes back and you find yourself a changed individual. For me, the beauty of friendship lies in that transformation. The way I know I have great friends is because I know they'll hold me accountable. I know they'll be there to support me in times of need, and because I know they've changed me. It's as simple as that. My platonic love for them takes on a life of its own when I'm with them, and I can only hope the same is true for them. Richard Coca is a junior majoring in human biology from Southern California. Richard wrote this essay, Transforming Our Definition of Platonic Love, in response to the COVID-19 pandemic and the resulting closure of Stanford campus for most undergraduates.
It's a lot more learning about boundaries. We obviously can't be in touch all the time, but we still try to make an effort to. And I think there's a mutual understanding that despite us being apart and not talking as much, that we're still friends. I referenced this in the essay, but I don't think friendships are necessarily transactional. And while we are probably meeting and sort of connecting less frequently, I think the biggest personal transformation, at least for me, has been this expansion of friendship beyond just being in the same room and being intentional when we're connecting with one another and catching up. And also knowing that we can support each other, even if it's 1,000 miles apart. And I think that's a good lesson to learn, especially prior to graduating. I think after graduation and sort of seeing all your friends go all across the country, the pandemic was almost a preparation in a way to sort of see how those friendships will last and how you'll build them.
He also explained how his relationships at Stanford have changed him.
I think prior to sort of coming into Stanford, I was very much not a person who enjoyed like receiving hugs. Like I was very sort of kept to myself, a lot more introverted than I am now. And I think in particular, the Fly community within the Fly office sort of is one of the greatest examples of sort of how they transformed me. I remember sort of every day after classes, my freshman year in particular, I would just walk in there and there would be so many people that I could just randomly chat to. But in particular, I remember becoming much more of a hugger. Sort of my first friends would just like hug me and be like, this is incredibly weird. Like we met like 2 days ago and here you are hugging me. And then I became much more of like a physical touch kind of person.
And how he wonders if serendipitous relationships will return after the pandemic.
I'm thinking of one sort of funny relationship in a way. There's this guy, Will, who literally, whenever we decide to like party on campus, we always, and I mean always, see each other. And I think it's particularly funny because we'll just like chat up for a minute. But I don't know, will parties exist after COVID? Just considering like how much of a health hazard there will be. I don't think it necessarily will sort of diminish the relationship, but I think it will just decrease the frequency and interaction that I have. And I think that's sort of an example of how interpersonal relationships were sort of, especially the much more casual and the less close ones, will sort of have to just depend on how we adapt after COVID, if that's even going to happen.
Richard elaborated on how he believes that love is not transactional.
There's a good book called All About Love, which I would highly recommend anyone who is interested in the bell hooks quote read. It sort of defines love as, like, the definition of love is a lot more expansionary than we usually think of. I think when a lot of people think about love, you go to sort of a romantic relationship where it's just like the connection between two people, versus Hook's definition of love, which again is much more expansionary, but sort of talks about this spiritual growth and how love is really this intention to invest in someone and for them to invest back in you, and sort of this idea that if a friendship is actually a friendship, or if a relationship is actually as strong as one claims it to be, it'll reflect in sort of the personal growth of both the individuals who enter the relationship.
Lines of Love and the Daily Brew are produced by the Stanford Daily. This episode was produced and narrated by Kirsten Mettler and Zhou. I'm Ellie Wong, the managing editor of Volume 258. If you have a podcast idea, visit stanforddaily.com/join.